So I've gotten a lot of requests for a piriformis stretch or a hip stretch. Again, this relates back to tight glutes and tight lateral hamstring. So I want to give everyone a stretch that feels doable. So maybe starting it with the glute rollout, particularly the last bit with the rollout under the butt in the figure 4 stretch, which is in one of the other YouTube videos. Not necessary, but could be helpful to free stuff up before you head into the stretch. So everyone is familiar mostly with a pigeon pose in yoga, and I'm just going to shift it around a little bit. So you can certainly do this on the floor. That will make it harder. Everyone has a chair at home. This is a fancier version of a chair, but is a chair nonetheless. And a yoga brick or a book, some sort of elevation. And for whichever side you're going to stretch, you're going to stick it underneath the forward thigh. So in a traditional pigeon, as people get onto the floor, they want to get that knee down, and then they're like hanging forward. Now, that's not necessarily wrong, but if you're shooting for piriformis and the backside of the hip, it's not going to be as helpful unless you square that pelvis off. And using a brick can help. So you're going to stick it underneath that thigh. So now this side's a little elevated. And if I were to go down into my pigeon right now, my two hip points are not at all aligned. Here is a square pelvis. And already, that's a stretch. Then you can walk it forward. And the important thing to note here is that as you walk forward, that you're hinging forward at the hip and not curling through the spine. The stretch is in the butt. It's in the hip. So you want to be hinging from that joint. And as I go down, I'm also going to keep an eye on my foot. I know it's like I'm beating a dead horse here with the foot conversation, but if I let my foot sickle like this, it's going to lessen my stretch because I'm shortening the lateral line with the placement of my ankle. So if I keep my foot a little bit flexed and I keep working through that big toe joint and inner heel, it's going to cause me to get more of a stretch in my lateral hamstring and then up into the butt. So finding that hinge forward and keeping those hip points even. And I really have to think about wrapping this hip around in order to get a stretch through that back tush. And I'll do it on the other side so you can see that orientation. So here's that leg. So I'm trying to get this glute stretch. So I'm going to even out my pelvis. I'm going to flex this foot and then hinge, not curl, forward. And that's way more butt than by just kind of sinking into that stretch, that I'm really reaching. And you can see that tuck versus that. So that's a long glute and that's a tight glute. So that's where I'm reaching that stretch for. And remembering to breathe. Tissues are not going to move if you're clenching your jaw. Your jaw is connected to your diaphragm, which is connected to your pelvic floor. Diaphragm isn't moving, you're not breathing because you're holding tension here. It's going to impact muscle performance. And take a big breath in and a big breath out. And then bring that all the way up. And that should feel pretty good in the hips.